Okay, one of your other assignments besides the semester project is a portfolio. And you'll turn in the portfolio 2 times throughout the semester. The first first part of the portfolio is due, and let me verify the date, it's sometime in October. October 9th. So that would be actually a week from this coming Wednesday. The first part of the portfolio is done. And the second part of the portfolio is due at the end of the semester, December 6th. Well, what is a portfolio? Portfolios are used in many careers to showcase a person's work. You know, in the past, portfolios were often books that a person would have, like if you were a photographer or a model, you would have a portfolio, and that portfolio would contain pictures of your work. And you take them and showcase them to people if you wanted to get a job. Like if you wanted, if you wanted your wedding photographed by someone, you would come and look at their book of wedding photos that they have taken, and you could see if you like their work or not. Now, of course, that's a perfect sort of thing to be put online. And now many portfolios are put online, both for photographers and now web developers can put portfolios. And the nice thing is about web developers is you can put examples of your work on a portfolio and let people who are, prospective employers to see examples of your work and see the quality of your work. So we're going to look at some really high-end portfolios now. So I'm going to look for web developer portfolio. And this looks good. Here's 25, and we'll go in no particular order. I haven't previewed these. So let's look at this person's. And you click on it. This, unfortunately, is only a photograph of the person's web page. I want to go one where that has actual links. There we go. All right, here's an example of a portfolio, and we'll translate it to English. I'm Charles Bruyere. You can call me Charlie. I'm a front-end, I'm a graphic designer, UX, UI, which stands for user experience, user interface designer, and front-end web developer. And you can click here and see examples of the projects that they have done. You can have you can see about the person. That probably will contain a resume. There you go, a CV, which is the same thing as a resume pretty much. So this is a chance for you to showcase your skills. Let's look at some of the projects this person has worked on. Game of the Goose, that looks interesting. They apparently did the graphics for this game. And they're showing you the graphics that they've done. In other cases, it can actually be websites. Let's look at another one. This is a little more conventional looking layout of it. You could tell the first person was really showing off their graphics design skills, and this person is, you know, focusing on their web programming stuff. And let's click on projects to see what they have to offer. Spotify profile. Log in to see your profile. Minimal dark blue theme for Visual Studio Code they've developed. And they have links to other things. So anyhow, I want you to develop a portfolio in this class for a couple of reasons. First of all, it would be great if you used it to actually market yourself, especially if you're going into web development as a career. It is not very expensive to put a website out there and make it available for the world to see. So you know, you can showcase your work, and you can showcase, you know, as you get professional assignments, you can showcase the professional work you did. You could certainly also showcase the your coursework on a portfolio. And that way on your resume, instead of you telling people what you can do as far as coding, you can actually show them. I am an expert in CSS. If that's written on a resume, you know, what does that mean? But if you can actually show someone an example of your CSS, then that is a lot more descriptive and a lot more convincing for the prospective employer. The other thing is that people that spend their time working on programming and web development and all that, to go beyond what is simply required in the class, are oftentimes what employers want. I talk to prospective employers, you know, a few times a year, and the one thing that they stress is they want someone that goes beyond just the simple requirements. They want people who actually devote their free time to working in the field. So develop a website for an organization that you belong to, or a fan site, or anything like that, and put it up on the web. And a portfolio is a good way to start. So the first assignment, the first portfolio assignment, you'll put your first 6 lab assignments on. Your final version of the portfolio will have all your lab assignments for the semester on it. I think there'll be 13, 12 or 13, I don't remember. So let's look at a sample portfolio. And this is just a sample. It's not meant to be completed. There's just a few things I want to show. We open up this web page, we have my portfolio. Now, I've used what is called Greek text on this example. Greek text is just a placeholder text, and you will not turn in any assignment that has Greek text in it. It's just a way of you to sort of put a rough outline of what your page is going to look like. Now, in your prototype for your project, you might have some Greek text. But in this case, on your portfolio, you'll have a paragraph about you. My name is Mike Zellers. I'm a Lorain County web developer who has X amount of years experience in web development and does HTML5, CSS, JavaScript. You'd write a description about yourself in this paragraph. Now, you probably would have a link also to your resume, as we saw one of the examples did. And that could be a PDF file, so you can create one in Word and just link to a PDF. Then you're going to have examples of your assignments. So you have links to those assignments, as well as a little bit of information about this, indicating what you learned. Now, portfolios can be done for a number of purposes. They can be done in a classroom to sort of give you a chance to think back and reflect on the semester and what you've learned, and reflect on your journey into web development. For the kind of portfolios we looked at previously, those are more marketing portfolios where they're really meant to showcase the person's skills. All right, so I'm asking you to put all your projects on a portfolio. In a more of a marketing portfolio, you'd pick the few projects that you've worked on that you think are best showcase your skills. But you'd put a little description about it too. And in this case, I've just put this lab. I learned how to put ending tags. Then you have a link to it. Then you have a link back to the portfolio. This is important. This is the thing that will get most people deductions. Most people that get points off because they either do not have links to their project pages, or the link doesn't work, or they don't have a link back to the portfolio home, or that link doesn't work. Now, you're going to have a lot of files as part of the portfolio. It's best if you divide those files into different folders. All right. So for example, I have here a folder called Portfolio with Style. And I have my portfolio page, which is index.html. And my CSS file. But I don't have every project in the same folder as my portfolio homepage. Instead, I have a lab 1, lab 2. So on your first pass of the portfolio, you'd have portfolio lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, lab 4, lab 5, lab 6. Then on the final version of the portfolio, you would have lab 1 through 13, or however many labs we have. Now, if we do this, all the links that we've created in this class have been based on the assumption that the pages are in the same folder. So when we create a page from page 1 to page 2 on our previous assignments, all of them were in the same folder. So you create the links a certain way. In this case, the pages are in a subfolder. So this is a portfolio home. The page for lab 1 is called FAQ.html, and it's in the subfolder lab 1. Okay? So it's in the subfolder lab 1. So how do we create that link when we're going from this page, index, to a page in the folder lab 1? Well, it's pretty easy to do. You create the link by putting the folder that you're going down to first. Now this works if the lab 1 folder is a subfolder of your index page, which is what we have. Here's our index page. Lab 1 is a subfolder of the folder that the index page is in, that the main portfolio page is in. So I put in the name of the folder / and then the name of the page. So I do lab1/faq.html. Same thing for the second lab. lab2/faq.html. That way, if you have files by the same name, it won't matter because each of them are in the same folder. So, follow this formula. Have your portfolio page in a folder. Inside that folder, have subfolders for each of the lab assignments. And then create the link by putting in the folder name / and then the web page that you want to access. Now, how do we get back to the portfolio page from the page inside this folder? I usually go and put the link back to the portfolio, like right on the top of the page on the header. And I do .. /index.html. The .. designates go from this folder, your subfolder, go up a folder. So go to the folder that contains this lab2 folder. So I'll go up and then I'll pull up index.html. Those of you that have taken CISS216, you do very similar things when you're doing paths of files. You put the name of the folder when you're going down to a folder. You put ... when you're going up to a parent folder. Now I could make this as many folder deep as I want to. I could create a folder in here saying HTML and put that in that, in which case I would say lab1/html/faq.html. And the same thing works with links. It works with links to style sheet. It works for images and so on. You use the same path process to get to it. This is called the relative path to files. In other words, you specify from the web page that you're on, how do you get to the file? And again, that usually involves going down to a subfolder. So you can do all your assignments like this, not just a portfolio. When you get into your project, you might have a lot of files and you might want to separate them. You know, a lot of people will have a folder for the CSS files, a folder for images, a folder for JavaScript files, and so on. And then maybe a folder for HTML files. Be sure you test this. I get students that turn stuff in that just doesn't work. And I know it doesn't work because when the first time I test it out, it gets a problem. What do I mean by test it out? I mean, when you get the link, make sure you can go from the portfolio to the page and the page back to the portfolio. Like that. All right. Now, let's look at more detail about the CSS because this is a very simple CSS layout for this portfolio. That is in the style sheet. Main.css. The advantage of putting it in a separate file is that you can use that file now on multiple pages. So let's open that up. Okay. Now, first of all, I've set the background of the body white. Background color of the body is white. So there you see the background is white. Now, I have similar CSS rules for the three main portions of this page. Three portions of this page is that there is a header, there's a section, and there's a footer. So I have three similar things that I want to look similar. If we look at the web page itself, I want those to look similar, but I don't want them to look identical. Notice that the background color for each of these is slightly different. Okay, so let's look at the CSS. Let's look at the header first. The background color is $A. Now, when we talked about colors, remember we said that colors are expressed as 3 pairs of values in hexadecimal, where the lowest digit is a 0 and the highest digit is an F. So you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. So this is sort of high. AA means the red, green, and blue are all turned on fairly high. And that ends up being this very sort of light shade of gray. I guess it's not that light, but it's a lighter shade of gray. Now, I have a border of 1 pixel. The color of the border is black and it's solid. So it's maybe really hard to see, but there's a border that goes all the way around the header section. I can make it look more obvious if I want. I could say border 10 pixels. Trouble with the position of this. You drag it down. It's kind of a drag, no pun intended, that I have to make it so big so that I can see it. I do apologize. I'm still having issues with my eye. So I'm going to save this. All right. Now remember, I changed the border width to 10 pixels. So if I refresh it, it has a very big border going around it. Now I can change the color of it if I want to. I could say $770000. That would be sort of a darker shade of red, right? Because 77 is a little below the midpoint of hexadecimal numbers. So sort of a darker red. And I can make this, there's a number of choices. If you're using Visual Studio Code, it will show you those choices. So for example, dotted. Is one of the choices. That's the nice thing about Visual Studio Code is as you type it in, it'll show you all the possibilities that you have. You can do a ridge border. See what that does. Remember, after you save something, and we get something like that. I usually keep it simple and make the border solid. And since this sort of goes for a monochrome look, I'm going to make the border black. And I'm going to get the width down to 1 pixel, so it's not too wide. So I'm going to set it back to what it was originally. If I make the page bigger, you can see it's a little bit bigger. Now, the next thing I have is margin. And with margin, there are 4 different margins that you can say for an item. There's the top margin, there's the right margin, there's the bottom margin, and then there's the left margin. Now, I only have 2 margins listed here. I only have 0px and auto. So how does this work? Well, it works like going around the clock. 0px will be the top margin. Auto will be the right margin. We then repeat. 0px would be the bottom margin, and auto would be the left margin. So what does that mean? The margin is the space between different things on the page. So we have no space on the top or bottom for this. Auto means that we center it within the page in this case. So notice as I resize page, it resizes the margins to keep it centered. Width is 60%. And that means 60% of the available space. So we have this available space going across, and this takes up 60%, more or less. What do I mean by more or less? You have to add on a couple of things. You add on the border width, that is 1 pixel in this case, and the padding. And if this wasn't auto, you'd add on the margin. Now, what is the padding? Padding is the space from the end of the item, from the border to where the text is. If I make that padding bigger, there'll be greater space. Between the text and that. And notice it made the whole thing wider because 60% gets added to that, the padding and the border width to make up the total width of the page. Width is just the width of the content area. If we don't have any padding, we get this. Where everything looks sort of rammed inside of that box. So usually we like to give a little bit of padding. There we're back to where we were originally. Now this is called the CSS box model. There's probably a link to it on Canvas that discusses it in more detail. What that means is block tags, which a block tag is any tag that starts on a new line, have widths and heights. They have margins, they have padding, and they have borders. Now these borders and padding and margins can be expressed in all 4 directions: top, right, left, bottom. So I could say padding on the top equals 15px. That'll give me something that probably doesn't look too good, but just to demonstrate. There's padding on the top, but there's no padding on the bottom and on the right or left. But you have the flexibility to do that. If you don't specify direction, if you don't specify top or bottom or right or left, you can, then it applies to all four of them. Again, it's like a clock. The padding has a top, right, left, and bottom. If you only specify one value, the top gets it, the right gets it, the bottom gets it, and the left gets it. With as percentages is usually a good idea because, again, it will expand and contract with the page. So if I have a very small window, it makes this smaller and it doesn't cut off any of the data. If I don't specify a height, it makes it the height to fit all the content. Now, section, I have virtually the same thing, except I make the background a lighter gray. How do I know that's a lighter gray? Because C is a higher hexadecimal digit than A. Remember, we go 0 through 9, then we go A, B, C, D, E, and F. So A is like 10, C would be like 12. The rest of it is the same. And likewise, this is the same. This is a little bit lighter. This is sort of between the darkness of the header and the section. Now notice this. Notice that with not much change, with very simple CSS, we can go from our page, which looks very generic, like that. That looks like many of your pages for labs 1 and 2. But with some simple CSS, we can really start to make the page look good and look more professional and more well-designed. And as we learn more CSS, we can do even more and more with it. So again, it really doesn't necessarily take a lot of styling to make a page look professional. So take the effort to do so. Now we can change more than this. And the next few weeks, we're going to study a lot of different things as far as CSS goes to make the page. But let's preview some of them. One of them I can do is I can change the fonts. So I could change the fonts like this. I could say on the body, I want the font family Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif. Let's see what that does. That changes the font everywhere on the page. Why did it change it everywhere on the page? Because I put that in the body CSS rule. So everything in the body gets that CSS rule. What if I only wanted some of the page to have that? Like, let's say I wanted the header to have a different font. I could then put in the header section and it gives me a list of common ones. I'll pick Georgia, Times New Roman, Times, and serif. Now, because this is defined as for everything on the page, but the header is more specific. So everything on the page will get that style rule, except the header will get this style rule. So notice that the header has a different font than the section or the footer. Now, you might wonder why I've listed several fonts here. A font has to be on the browser has to be installed on the machine to be able to be used on a web page. So for example, if we look at this first one, every Windows machine is going to have Arial installed. Every Mac is going to have Helvetica installed. And if you're on some other platform like Linux and you don't have either of these fonts, we're going to use the generic sans serif font. So the browser actually goes down the list, starting at this font, looks to see if it's installed. If it's installed, it uses it. If it's not installed, it goes to the next. The final font in the list is a generic, either serif or sans serif, and every machine will have a generic sans serif or serif font. Now, what do I mean by serif and sans serif? Fonts are generally categorized three different ways. Serif fonts, sans serif fonts, or decorative fonts, I guess, is the third way. Let's go into Word and let's really make these letters big. If I type in an A, all right, let me change the font to Times New Roman. If you notice the difference between these, there's a little foot on the bottom of the Times New Roman letter A. Those things are called serifs, S-E-R-I-F. And a serif font will have those little things at the bottom. Let's pick another serif font, Georgia. Has the little foots there. Sans serif font, sans is French for without. So sans serif means that, hey, these letters don't have those little thingies on the end. Now, what difference does it make? Well, part of it is the mood that these create. Serif fonts are the more classic looking fonts. Sans serif fonts are the more modern looking fonts in general. Headlines often are done in serif, where the body of the text is often done in sans serif. So like if I was going to do this for real, I might do this. I'm going to put a style rule for header H1. Now this is different than what we've seen before, right? We have for the header, H1 means every H1 inside a header. So if we save it, the header H1 gets this style rule. The rest of the header gets that style rule. Why? Because it doesn't fit this style rule. Therefore, the one for the body applies. Now, I didn't put a style on H1 to say the background color or the border or anything like that. So therefore, it gets what is in the header. These styles sort of cascade down. And if you don't have anything defined on a certain level, the rule that was defined on sort of the level above it is what applies. Now, this combination of using serif text for headlines or headings and sans serif fonts for like the body of the text is very common. If we look, for example, at the Wall Street Journal, notice the headlines are in serif font and the text is in sans serif font. It's a very common way of doing things. Now, how many fonts should you have on the page? Well, few. You don't want too many, right? Because then it looks like a ransom note, right? Where you have different letters cut out from different magazines and different words and everything's a different font. But if it's only one font, it might look a little boring. So you find a balance. 2 or 3 maybe different style rules regarding a font would probably do the trick. You want the fonts to mean something. In other words, I'm putting these fonts on the header to make it stand out. Anything that we do in a style rule, like color or font or whatever, is done to sort of shift the focus to a certain aspect of the page. Now, I mentioned a third different kind of font, which is a decorative fonts, which that would be, an example of that would be Comic Sans. There kind of looks handwritten. Another example would be this, where it looks handwritten and old-fashioned. Now, in general, you're going to stick to serif and sans serif fonts, unless you have a very specific subject that you're doing that these other font types would be more suitable for. So, you know, if I was doing a website for a Renaissance fair, yeah, maybe then this font would be good. And even then I'd use it sparingly, like maybe for headings. And it would look good. It would look good and it would get the point across and it would create a mood for the site. I still wouldn't use it for all the content on it though, because that would make it a lot harder to read and being annoying. Remember that a little bit goes a long way, right? So if we're using color, you know, a little bit of color to accent a few things is good. A little bit of different fonts to highlight and to accent certain things are good. This example here looks professional, even though we haven't done a lot with it. Very subtle use of color, but notice the color does something. The color in the borders does something. In other words, instead of having just one big block of text, we let the user know that this is grouped together, this is grouped together, and then finally this is grouped together. All right, next week we're going to start going over the prototype for your website. You know, last week we talked about developing the design document. Today we talked about portfolios. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the portion of the design document that relates to the prototype. In other words, developing rough drafts for your web pages. And in doing that, we're going to create a bunch of different layouts and use a lot of different CSS code to accomplish these things. All right, that's all I had today. We will see you next week.